Hey everybody, we're in for another episode. So, we're back at the shop again. Metal Magic is moving along. I'm getting more professional. I even got uniforms now. I don't know why I chose dark brown pants and light brown shirts, but that was my first choice. I even got them for my brother, and I had a guy working for me. And they're expensive. Not really, but they're expensive if the people that you have working for you aren't making money for you. So you have to make sure that they're profitable if you're going to have that offer of uniforms for them. Um, I'm becoming better at running the shop. I don't know if this one ever came up. Uh, I want to point out before I go any further, when I'm talking about learning these things um, during my life, it's God who's teaching me, okay? Can't give anyone else credit directly. I can say that because of a situation I experienced with other people involved, yes, they were um, instrumental as well. But I give God credit for laying the groundwork and putting things together as they did, which sometimes is quite negative for me. But now I think also I want to point out that we were talking about drinking as far as in my home life. Well, that of course now has also allowed some of my friends to come back to me because they didn't know what to do with me sober, and I honestly didn't know what to do with them. So one of the people that I got uniforms for was a friend of mine who drank quite heavily, and which I mean, I knew he had problems, but I'd never really felt like it was a really big issue. And so anyway, I had him working for me, and he was the first person I had to fire. And I know I've brought this up in other videos, but I can tell you that it took me 2 weeks to fire him. And that was because I just couldn't do it. I really just don't have that kind of stomach for that kind of stuff. But on the day that I did let him go, as I woke up in the morning, it came to my mind that I shouldn't fire him, that I should just tell him I'm not going to give him any more work. And that was an idea so that he understood that he was still allowed to come to my shop. It wasn't that I hated him. I just couldn't afford to give him work when he wouldn't show up. So, sure enough, that day he shows up, and I don't have work for him because I don't know when he's going to show up. And I let him know. It made me sick to my stomach. It was that bad. It wasn't just something like I couldn't sleep and things like that. I mean, I felt guilty, which I shouldn't have. There was no reason for me to feel guilty for that, except that I thought, well, maybe there's something I need to be doing. And that's why it took so long. Not the 2 weeks. I'm talking about even before that. I kept trying things, thinking that there was a way to help him out to get him to show up. So there was another thing that I learned. Another thing I learned is I'm not making enough money. I need to make more money. I thought that increasing the volume of work would be one way of doing that. And this is before I actually developed being efficient. And my brother-in-law, he was I'm not sure where he was at exactly with his body and fender work. He didn't have his own shop. But somehow we got together on the idea of him working at the shop. Now, for it to work out right, in my opinion, and he agreed, that we should basically just be two separate businesses. You might say we used the same name, but if he took on the job, he wrote the bill, he stood behind the work, things like that. Well, this worked good and it worked bad because he had toys and he loved playing with them. In other words, he had a three-wheeler and things and we were always looking to build go-karts and stuff like that. And I ended up trying to taking a 125 Kawasaki motor dirt bike and putting a 350 Honda twin cylinder in it, but we'd mess around with stuff like that all the time. We'd drag race through the shop because on the high side we had a door at either end, and so we would line the two three-wheelers up and launch them off of there, and whoever got to the other end of the shop first won, and then we'd go outside and go opposite directions around the building and come back in and do it all over. We'd do burnouts using lard. I don't know where we got the lard, but anyway, and we'd have fun that way. And then somebody would come around with a dirt bike or something like that, and then we're off out in the woods running around. I still hadn't got that out of my system. I mean, I have stories. I drove off the top of a dirt pile and for whatever reason the three-wheeler launched out into the air and went all the way over upside down, so I landed on the ground first, and I was far enough away from it. I rolled over just as it hit the ground. That could have probably killed me. One time I was trying to do a dirt track slide with a dirt bike and flipped that damn thing over, and the first thing that hit the ground was my head. I mean, I just drove it right into the ground, folded it back, my chin against my chest, and I don't know why I didn't break my neck, but I came out of that one. Another time I drove over a dirt pile that I forgot that we had cut the whole other side away with the bulldozer, so it was straight down. Now that one I made it out of without too much trouble. But then this guy brought his Elsinore 250 over. And right off the bat, I'm not good at dirt bikes anyway. And I went out in this one pasture and I cracked the throttle and the bike just stood right up, and it took everything I had to get the throttle slowed back down. And then I shifted in next gear and cracked the throttle just gently, I thought, but it lifted right off the ground again, and again I almost wrecked it. And from then on I could only flick the throttle because I just couldn't handle the thing. Again he brings it over, and so I say, okay, I'll try again. I take the thing down in the back pasture, and we had a track built. I don't know, it might have been about a half-mile long. And I'm driving around there, and I'm starting to get it to slide in the corner a little bit, and I'm thinking I might have this thing, I'm starting to figure this thing out. I don't want to ever say I had it figured out. I'm just driving down a straight section, and all of a sudden the back end comes flying up off the ground and over top the front, and me, of course, being launched out head first, well, whatever, body first, flat. I'm flying flat through the air. I hit the ground and I plow to a stop. Now I always wore a helmet, but that doesn't do much good in a case like this. And and I don't know what's going on. I look back and there's the bike sliding to a stop, and I feel like my one hand is gonna get split apart right between these two fingers, and I look down and here's a wad of sod plowed up into between my fingers to the point that, I mean, it is in pain. I pull that out, of course, that relieves the pain. What had happened was I drove over a stick with the front wheel. It went between the rear control arm and tire, and of course that meant it had no place to go, and the front end of the stick stuck in the ground, and it just pole vaulted the back end of the bike right over it. Well, I took the bike back to him. I said, never again. And one more three-wheeler when well, actually two. One, I was driving through this real deep water hole, and the water would come up over top of the seat, and you'd have to kind of bounce on to get the rear wheels to bite to push you through it. Well, just as the tires bit, the front wheel hit a stone that was sticking up in the water. You couldn't see it, I mean, and it just rolled right over on top of me, and so there I am laying completely submerged with this three-wheeler holding me down. And I was never scared, but I did think about it afterwards. That could have been the end of me. And one other time I tried to jump a creek where the bank was real high on one side. Well, I couldn't keep the front end up on it, so it dove into the other side and threw me across the front of it and bent the front forks back almost to where the tire couldn't be turned. So those are the kind of things I got into. So while I'm working with Bruce, which was a good and a bad thing, there was good and bad in other areas. A bad thing was I wasn't happy with his work. First off, of course, he didn't know, how to weld or machine or anything like that. He knew body work. That was it. It's not like he was stupid, but he had no experience. And his whole way of going about something was completely different from mine. He would just dive right in. Somebody give him something to do, he would just start. No drawing or calculations of distances, no thinking about what kind of material to use. He'd just go. And then he'd have a problem. And then he'd have to cut it apart. Or he'd have to, redesign it. Or he might even have to throw the whole damn thing away and start over. Or he'd end up with something that, to me, was less than ideal. And I didn't really like that going out of my shop. But here was the other thing. And this is something I had to learn from him. His customers liked him. They had no problem with coming back and asking him to do other work for him. So, evidently, I'm actually being too picky. Also, you might say that in a roundabout way, I took just as long to get a job done. I may not have to redo it 3 times before it's right, but it still took me just as long to get it done. Because I'm there afraid to get started. I'm thinking about this could happen, that could happen, blah, blah, blah. Well, I learned that, first off, I want to be actually more efficient than him as far as time. I want to get things done quicker. So, what do I have to do? Well, I don't have that much time in the actual building. I have too much time worrying and planning. Finally, I came to the conclusion that I could only allow so much time for planning, and then I had to start no matter what. Now, I had never had a hard and fast number. There was nothing in exacting about it, but I started stopping myself. I'd say, all right, I've thought about it enough. I got to get started, and I would start on it. And I learned, because of my planning, that most of the time I worried about things that weren't going to happen anyway. And then there always was the things that I didn't think about that did happen. Hence the Kevin's Kevin's law. Anything that can't go wrong will go wrong. And so I learned that from him. Now at the same time, he got better at what he was doing as well. In fact, later on in life, he got a job with the, now I've forgotten what it is. Well, I can't think of the name, but it's with the government, and they test new products to see if they actually meet the claims of the companies that sell them, and of course if they don't or whatever. I mean, like, he even built a machine for testing rubbers. So, and in fact, he's retired now from there, and ended up being head of the department that builds all the test equipment and things like that. It's not a big department, but the thing was, is you had to know a lot of different things. You couldn't, you had to be an expert in everything. So I take a little credit in helping him get started in that direction. Now, I brought up that I am back to drinking. So I'm also now working in the evenings as well. I won't drink during the day at all. However, in the evenings, yeah. Yeah, I will. And I have friends that come over, and I say friends, they're just neighbors that stop by or whatever, and they're getting in the habit of showing up because I'm around, and of course it's kind of just a laid back area in some way to get away from the wife. And of course I'm drinking in the evenings there. The only day I don't drink is Sundays. I don't drink on Sunday, but too often other nights I do, especially when I'm painting a car. That's a great time to drink. I don't know what it is, but the smell of Emron paint and Coors Light beer was great. Or Keystone when finances got rougher. One of the friends that would come there, he started wanting to do cars on the side there at the shop, which I thought sounded pretty good, but it ended up not working out too well because sometimes his customers would show up and he wouldn't be there, and I had to be the one that answered for him. I had another friend kind of the same way, but he was doing automotive work. They're still decent people. It's just that after they put in a whole day of a full-time job, they really lost interest in doing these kind of things at night. But I'm going to finish with one more tale of having fun. I told you that we had a track down in this pasture behind the farmhouse we called it. It's about a half-mile long track. I had bought this Pinto from my brother-in-law. It was just a piece of junk. He wanted to get rid of it. I think I gave him $50 and crap, the battery was worth that. I ended up selling the motor out of it too. It still ran, but it burned oil like crazy. I mean, like crazy. So anyway, one day it's still running. I haven't tore it apart yet. And my son's there, and the one guy that wanted to paint cars is there, and I said maybe we need to take it for a ride. So we drove down there, and we're driving around this track, just beating the crap out of this vehicle. And about that time, it stops moving, and yet the engine's running. And I turn the car off. We try to figure out what's going on. Try to turn the car on. It won't start. But if I leave the clutch out and crank it over, the car moves forward. So I push the clutch in, and it doesn't move forward. And I finally said, we sheared the bolts off of the flywheel. Now, my friend didn't believe it, and I said, nah, that's what it did. And so then my son's sitting in the back, and I get out, and I start jumping on the roof, putting dents in it and things like that, and having some fun. And then we all had to walk back up, get a tractor, whatever, truck, come down there, hook to it, drag it up. Of course, at that point, we had to find out what's wrong, so everything gets pushed aside. We pull it in, jerk the engine out of it, and sure enough, sheared the bolts off the flywheel. He says, I would have never believed that. And I said, I didn't know what else it could be. So, well, I think that's enough for now. Next time, maybe we'll talk about the other businesses I start getting into to try to make more money. Till then, have a good whatever.